Thanks for joining us, Tracy. How are you this morning? You all right?
Thank you for having me. Bit hot, bit sticky, but that's possibly a bit too much information.
No, it's good, mate. It's good. We prefer it to be hot and sticky. That's what it's all about, these conversations, getting them going, yeah? So can you do us a favour, please, and tell us a little bit more about Tracy Westall?
Oh, okay, right. Well, clearly from the accent, I'm a Brummie and a proud Brummie as well. So, yeah, a little bit about me. Do you mean career or do you mean me? What do you want?
What would you prefer? You know, if somebody asked you that in the pub, how do you respond?
Well, that's a really good question. Probably, like everybody else, I hide behind career, don't I? Because we all do that, don't we?
Yeah.
Kind of defines who we are and what we are. Yeah, so I'm a long-term tech executive. Spent 30 odd years working for a big tech firm, big in the region and everywhere else. And then about 10 years ago, 8 years ago maybe, I went portfolio, which basically means I do lots of non-exec work. So I met Andy and I sit on a variety of boards, quite diverse boards actually. Department for Transport, so I do a bit of government stuff. We own 5G. So connectivity and digital enablement, and two private equity backed firms and another firm involved in the digital transformation space to national security and government.
Wow. I mean, how many hours are in your day?
Sounds a lot. I mean, to be fair, it's not, is it? I mean, actually, what we're doing here kind of has changed everything, and it's all about the workplace. It's not the same. If we had this conversation 6 years ago, I'd have been knackered because I'd have been literally travelling to London mostly or into Birmingham. But actually, going online, the pandemic changed everything, didn't it? It kind of made hybrid working a little bit more acceptable rather than being something that like just lazy people did.
How does the portfolio career compare to having a long-term career?
They're just different, Andy. I mean, I love what I do now, the freedom to do that. I always say to people who ask me a bit of advice, I've got 3 criterias for anything I get involved in. First of all, I have to like the people. I mean, my advice is don't work with arses. So, because let's face it, if you can choose what you do, why would you? So like the people, really important for me. But personal chemistry, I like people. So therefore, that connection matters. Secondly, I've got to understand where I can add value. I've got to be able to see that really clearly. So don't just get involved in something for the hell of it. And then finally, ideally it's got to have some sort of tech, a bit of passion, got to get the blood racing. So because that's the criteria I use for the portfolio, I don't think you can always apply that to your corporate career, can you? I mean, it's not quite as simple as that. I had an amazing corporate career. You know, when I look back on it, I did some brilliant things. I worked in a great business and I worked in the tech industry at a time when being a woman in a leadership position was like being a unicorn. Actually, I'm not sure it's changed that much, if I'm really honest, but it was definitely like that. So to do the things that I did, you know, I was a board director at 30 in the 90s, almost unheard of. So I loved my corporate career and now I love the career I've got. They're just different phases. They're chapters of your life, aren't they?
I think that chapter's quite important in this conversation, actually. We'll come back to that. I've just had it in my ear, that it isn't Tracy Westall anymore. There's something else that follows. Is that right?
Yeah, there is. I was, recognised in the King's birthday honours list a few weeks ago for an honour. So, yeah, really, as you can tell, a little bit embarrassed about the whole thing, very humbled. But, yeah, so for sort of services to digital and to diversity, which I suppose is quite handy for this conversation, really.
Oh, well, massive congratulations. There's the Brummie coming through there, you know, the humble sort of, oh yeah, I got an OBE the other week. Yeah, moving on.
Shouting it from the rooftops. I mean, that's the thing about Brummies, isn't it? We are a bit self-deprecating. You know, we can't crack on with it really, don't we? You know,
we are. It's like, you know, it probably took you weeks to update your LinkedIn. If I ever got like a certificate, if I got 10-meter swimming badge, I'd be putting that on LinkedIn within a heartbeat. You're just straight into OBE as well. Forget an MBE, straight into OBE. Just, you know, that's how Tracy works. Congratulations. That's amazing. It's well deserved. I know the amazing things you've done to our community and in this space. And Andy's always spoken so positively about you. So fair play. Your daughter mentioned the report, didn't she, recently? What was that all about, Tracy?
Well, it wasn't particularly that she mentioned the report, but she said something to me while we were cleaning her bathroom. Look, my daughters are obviously grown up. You've got younger kids both of you have. But at some point in the future, you literally will do anything to spend time with him, even if that means cleaning a bathroom. So we were cleaning the bathroom, and I don't even know why this came up in conversation, but somehow the discussion of sexism in the workplace, clearly we obviously need to get out a bit more, but that came up in discussion, and she made a remark which kind of stopped me in my tracks, which is just about sexism generally, and that actually it's still rife. And that really made me stop. And the reason it made me stop was because I'm of a generation where we had to put up with all that crap, literally. And I thought we put up with all that crap and driven some change so that our daughters and your daughters don't have to do that, because we'd already done it. We kind of, if you like, that was a battle that we'd sorted. And the workplace and everything, the world is different. And we can kind of move on and fight other battles. So it was a bit of a shock for me to hear her say that isn't the case. And actually, it was quite depressing. And what it made me do was I kind of started to look at it. And I found this report from Amnesty International about the impact of toxic tech and how misogyny is shaping, particularly Gen Z's online experience. And I thought that was just depressing. The statistics were depressing. And it kind of gets you thinking that when, how on earth do we ever move on when the old battles are still raging? That's just depressing beyond words, isn't it?
I had a look at the report, and I'm sure we can, assuming we have notes, we'll put a link to it in the notes for the pod. But because you're right, stats aren't good at all. But a couple of quotes I picked up. So this is about 3,000 Gen Zers who were surveyed. One of the female quotes about the subject was, "It's so ingrained in society that many people don't recognize it when it's happening. It's so sad." And a couple of the male responders, "Anything online is a joke. It isn't that deep. It's a laugh." And then another female comment was, "Online misogyny often reflects real life attitudes. It shouldn't be taken lightly." And that's, young kids, let alone the age that mine and PJ's kids are. And I can definitely associate with the experiences they share with me about what's going on for young teens, but it's going all the way through. I was equally surprised when you shared it. And one of the platforms I don't have anything to do with that gets highlighted as a particular problem is TikTok, especially for the females. So if you, PJ, you come across this sort of stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, as a parent, I'm conscious of the world that these kids are living in. And I'm desperately trying to sort of control that. But even with every parental control that all these platforms seem to offer, things are still seeping through. My son's 14, my daughter's 10. And if we are talking about misogyny and sexism, there are things that no doubt they're looking at that is going to dictate what they think is normal. And that's my worry. Tracy, you said in your career that you understood that this was probably not the right way to do business or work, and I'm sure no doubt you said you had a very successful and within a brilliant space, you were a person that helped change perspective and maybe push back on that. But how does my daughter now know what is right? And then how do we as parents know what they need to know? It's just it's just mad, isn't it? It's really difficult.
I think there's a difference, isn't there? And it is important to differentiate between sexism and misogyny. And I thought about this quite a lot, actually, about whether or not I could look back and genuinely point to misogyny experiences. I could point to loads of sexist stuff. I mean, that was kind of, I went to work in the 1980s, early 90s. I mean, it sounds awful, but having your bottom smacked really wasn't, it wasn't unusual, and it certainly wouldn't get anybody hauled up in front of HR. You're walking past a building site and being whistled was just normal. And, you kind of had to muster everything and put your head down and kind of do that. That's kind of the societal things. And all of those things don't necessarily seem important, but of course what they are in the grand scheme of everything is that they are indicative of cultural behaviour, aren't they? That's the value. But, stupid things like I've been, if I go way back, being in a room where I'm literally the only woman and that people thought I was there to take the minutes, that kind of crap. That kind of nonsense that has happened. I wouldn't necessarily describe those things as misogynistic. Misogyny comes from a really deep-rooted place of, not liking women, and there's a difference. I genuinely don't think I can point to many or any examples that immediately spring to mind. Mine obviously veer into that. But I think what frightens me for the environment today, first of all, there's a difference, isn't there, between the digital world. First of all, that makes everything more pervasive, more accessible. And also, I think it creates a really perception that it's not real. We talk about in the real world, IRL, don't they? They talk about that as if what goes on online isn't real. Of course, it's bloody real. And it's really real to the people it's happening to. And it's the reach. And it's those kind of things that really give these things some oxygen. And I think that the experience probably of younger people, and particularly younger women, will be different to mine. You know, it's wrong for my generation to think we had it really bad, and it's not bad for them, because actually it is bad for them. It's just different in many ways.
Even on things like LinkedIn, I see the occasional post posted by a female talking about the inappropriate dating messages, images that get sent on what is supposed to be a professional network. And it still happens all the time. And just a reflection for me, probably a couple of years ago, I remember a letter coming home from my boys' school. The letter, it's a mixed school. The letter was about concerns that teachers were starting to express about the amount of Andrew Tate related kind of material and conversations that was just whipping its way around the kind of the classrooms. And I guess we've all seen him in the media of late, but that's where the online comes in, you know, having access to and being fed by the populist kind of algorithm. And I don't want to mention the Trump word ever again in this podcast series, but we'll get it out there, and another similar character. That's what my kids are accessing and being shared. You can't, try as we are as parents to get them off those devices, get them off their platforms. That's where the mates kind of live. And that's a real challenge I'm struggling to kind of get to grips with and balance out.
But I reckon, without mentioning the T word and that kind of stuff, the truth is, though, the rise of populism in any form is always about having somebody to blame, isn't it? And, you know, we talk about the word toxic masculinity, and that, your guys, I'm imagining that's quite a difficult conversation to have, because the default position is not all men are like that. No, of course they're not, but there are some men that are. And therefore, how do you... there's no doubt that social media, therefore, creates a perfect environment for young people who are trying to find their way in the world, don't know. I mean, let's face it, you turn the news on and it's really depressing. You know, how do you find hope and positivity? And the world that we're talking about creates the perfect environment, and women become part of the blame, don't they? Yeah. All of the things that are wrong in life are because women have taken this and have done that, and all of that kind of stuff. So you can kind of see that way that these things feed, if you like. And that's a very different world. That's not something necessarily that I would have identified as being a problem, but in quite the same ferocity that it is now. I mean, we had some examples of that, of course. You know, I mean, that old adage about women on boards and all of that kind of stuff. You know, how many times, and by the way, people have actually said this to me. Yeah, but I want the best person for the job, so that can't be a woman. Is that what you mean? Seriously. You know, it's those kind of debates. But you can kind of see how some of these things get a foothold, don't you? You can really see that.
I wonder where it all starts, because you're so right, Tracy. Like, I try and restrict the amount of news that comes into this house because the world is on fire. And then our refuge, if that's the right word, are programs like the Love Islands of this world, wherever it might be. And actually it goes from the world's on fire to a pastime or some light entertainment that then might show some of these behaviours that we're talking about, because, you know, blokes are encouraged to do X, blokes are encouraged to pull a girl to one side, all this vocab, as you put earlier, IRL, I'm going NGL, not going to lie. You know, I'm concerned that we are constantly pushing this sort of way of life into our kids' eyes and being, that I find it challenging to think that they're ever going to be able to call that behaviour out. So my banter in the changing rooms growing up, you know, looking back on it, you know, there is a very fine line a very clear difference between sexism and misogyny. And I suppose if you look back, there might have been a little bit of sexism knocking about. But how do kids this age now identify whether, I'm not saying sexism is right neither, but how do you differentiate between the two? Like, if you see someone overstepping that mark, that is like, hang on a second, this is pure hatred and something needs to be done. And likewise with sexism. How do these kids know that they've got to stand up and say something because they just see it everywhere?
I'm not sure that there's an easy answer, because probably if there was, we wouldn't be talking.
Yeah.
People would thought it, wouldn't they? But I guess it comes back to those small changes of behaviour. And this might seem a bit of a tangential point, but kind of indulge me for a sec. So I'm always a bit minded of I think it was Margaret Atwood's quote, that men are frightened that women will laugh at them. Women are frightened men will kill them. You know, it's quite a powerful statement, isn't it? And of course, what's the point that she's made? And I was involved in a work-related activity where I was doing some interviews with people I didn't know way back. And I don't even know how we got onto the subject, but it was kind of one of those conversations. And I said, one of the things from a woman's perspective is if you're out if you're out at night, so I'm going to London later, when I come back, it will be late at night. Now, let's just say, hypothetically, I'm walking down the street and Andy's walking behind me, or you're walking behind me, PJ. I don't know you're a good guy. I don't know you. Well, I do know you, but you know the point I'm trying to make. I don't know you. So my instinct will be concern, because that's literally hardwired into us. Yeah. So the if you like, the response isn't just to me. It's you guys taking some affirmative action. My husband's brilliant at explaining this, because we live really rurally. And if he's out on a dog walk, which if he's out with a dog and he sees a lone woman, he will make sure he goes out of his way for her not to be uncomfortable. He would never follow a woman down a path. It's those kind of things. So I suppose what I'm saying is, which is an indirect answer to your question, we've all got to think about the behaviour that we can change. It's small steps, big impact, isn't it? If we all do something small, whether it's to say to your mate, don't be a dick, stop it, or don't speak to somebody like that, or don't do that, or whatever. Or if it's, taking somebody out of the situation, it's small steps, isn't it? We've all got to take a little tiny bit of accountability for our own behaviour. Yeah, so tonight when I get off the train, I don't have to carry my car keys in my hand.
Yeah, in the middle finger like that, ready to go. Yeah, right. I think maybe that's a question that, so I suppose, I'm thinking back to my mum's fundamentals, the yeses, the pleases, the no thank yous, the hold the door open, don't look in ladies' purse. I still don't understand that one, to be fair. Maybe it's on us now as parents, educators, leaders, business, whatever it might be, to have those conversations as early as we can, to add additional fundamentals. If you are alone and you're walking home and there's a lady, how do you better make her relax? When do those conversations start?
I think there's truth in that, but just to circle back around to something you said, all that said, I love being a woman. I wouldn't want to be a bloke at all. I love being...
We're too complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I love it. And I'm not offended if you open the door for me. I'm not, because that's just polite. And I think there's an element of, we've probably kind of got to recognise that actually it's okay to be polite to each other. I don't take one of you opening the door for me as a sign that you think I'm unable to open the door for myself. I really don't. In fact, I'd rather you open the door for me because you're considerably younger than me. So it's those kind of things. I'm being a bit flippant, but the point is we can afford to be a little bit less precious about some of those things as well. It's okay.
A couple of things for me, because I do that. Mum taught me to do that. My dad taught me to do that. The old please and thank yous. I think manners is everything for me. Probably a couple of thoughts. I posted something recently on LinkedIn, actually it was today, about the need for people generally to get out and about more, see people again, shake hands, share stories, be vulnerable. And that's really true for my kids, think about how much time they spend online playing with their friends or doing whatever they do. I've noticed a big change in both of them as Ben started to play adult cricket. So we start to mix with different generations. It's a very welcoming club. There's all sorts of kind of people down there. So he's mixing with men, women, kids, all that kind of stuff. And then Sam has started waiting on at weddings. And again, getting out, solving problems, engaging with all sorts of people, the bride and the groom. It's done them both a power of good to see what really goes on in the real world.
Yeah.
As opposed to what goes on in the pretend worlds that they often play these games in. I think the same applies to us as adults. I'm mid-50 something. I'm certainly recognising the need to be out more to experience what's really going on rather than what we get fed through news and algorithms and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm always conscious when I'm scrolling that you're being presented with things, but I think it kind of takes us into the conversation about what the future looks like and what AI means and everything else that goes with it. You know, despite where we think about where we started this conversation, despite all of what we perceive as progress, you know, we're still in a position where only 22% of tech roles in the UK are women's. You know, we haven't moved much. 5 years ago, it was 17%, it's 22%. It's not massive. But when you look at things like digital leadership, CTOs, it's only 12%. And then when you look at AI roles, 12 to 15%. So when you start to look at the disparity of that number, what you can then see is that and the question we probably should be asking ourselves, which is real, are we baking in future problems? Because the world of AI changes everything.
Well, I mean, I suppose it could. I mean, AI is wonderful, isn't it, if used properly? But with your experiences, Tracy, do you suspect that AI might make it even worse, given that it can be sort of taking its information and its brain from almost like biased content?
Here's a perspective. I'm not sure AI can make it worse. I think humans can make it worse. And I think one of the books that really was a bit of an eye-opener for me was a book called Scary Smart.
Okay.
Future of Artificial Intelligence and How You Can Save the World by Mo Gawdat. And Mo Gawdat was the Chief Business Officer at Google X. He's you know, AI experts tend to be either on one side or the other. And he is still sitting on the fence of whether or not by 2055 we're either going to be sitting on the beach enjoying our free time or hiding from the machines. But It's a brilliant book. And he talks about 3 inevitabilities, and the inevitabilities are AI will happen, it will outsmart us, and bad things will happen because mistakes will happen. Those are 3 inevitables. So if you accept the principle of that, then the question is, what do we do about it? And I love his sentiment of we've got to be good parents. Bad AI will be because of bad humans.
Yeah.
So I think it probably links to the conversation we've already had. In all of these conversations, you can't be a passenger. You can't stand to the side and hope someone else is going to fix this, because you know what? They're really not. The fixing of society, the fixing of making sure AI positive and does all the things that we hope it will do, etc., is something we've all got to actively engage in. If I had £1 for everybody, you know, for people who say to me, I don't understand it, well, bloody find out then. You know, for God's sake, it's not difficult. Ask ChatGPT. You know?
Mate, ask ChatGPT to create you a playbook to sell at $50 a go, and you'll make a fortune, mate. There we go. So you think then? So you're saying, and I agree with you. Provided as parents, educators, employers, leaders, whatever, we are flagging behaviour, judging accountability, AI then will be good, if that makes sense.
Well, that's possibly a bit of a simplification. Probably a bit more I mean, Hollywood's made plenty of films showing us that isn't the case. But I think the point is, and Mo Gawdat talks about this in his book, he talks about thinking of AI as infants, and that as we've got a parental role to ensure that they've got good ethical structures, that actually the AI learns within an ethics framework. Now, that actually what you're teaching them are good outcomes. Actually, we're just describing how to raise kids, aren't we?
Yeah.
Thing. And actually, I loved the reason this book resonated with me is because I could see the parallel. I think there's a real danger that we disconnect, which is where we started, the digital world from the real world. There is no such thing. It is a single world. There are things that go on what we call online, but they absolutely are taking place in the real world. All that's happened with the digital world is we've made it more accessible to more people more quickly. So actually the principles of good ethics, you know, all of that structure, I really would recommend reading that book, because what he's saying is we've all got a role to play. Everybody has a role to play.
Andy, that's a new feature then, mate, asking our guests to recommend a book.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go. Do you say please and thank you to AI, Tracy?
No, I haven't, but actually I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day. There's a lady called Rebecca Amanda, who's a local lady.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I love what she does. She works with leaders and she's got a great backstory as well. Well, it's not, she's got a really sad backstory actually, but she's used it for such a powerful good, if that makes sense. And I love the fact that she's given her AI a name. She put a post on LinkedIn the other day, and I thought that was brilliant. She called it, I think she's called it B. I thought that was fantastic. And actually, what it made me realise is that I need to be a little bit more polite to my AI.
Well, they'll remember that, won't they, when they're sitting on the beach with you? Yeah, the AI assistant, Rebecca's, it signs off with a little bumblebee, doesn't it, and stuff like that. So I had a chat with one the other day, and I swear I read an article the other day. One guy asked his AI assistant to marry him, and he's married, and his wife was fine with it. It was bizarre, but really interesting because, those relationships that, they are relationships we've got to build, with these AI tools in a weird way. You said they're almost like our kids. We've got that responsibility to nurture those. Talking of nurturing, do these conversations need to start at school? I know they start in the home, but should we be addressing them in the curriculum?
Yeah, I think there's several things at play. The one thing that's always bothered me about tech, and we touched on it already, but one of the things that's always bothered me is around ethics. Everything, if we look at what's gone on in the world, geopolitical and everything else, you could probably argue that there's been a big ethics gap on whether or not we missed that. Did we not see that? If we go from the assumption that everybody has good intent, then I think that's possibly a bit naive, because I think we probably know that's not quite the case. But actually what we want is, we want to see an ethical environment. And I guess the starting point about ethics has to start really early, because that's actually the right and wrong piece, isn't it? I don't think it's about telling kids what to do, because I think we all know, don't we, that is literally a recipe for getting them to do the complete opposite, because we've all been there. We've all been those kids. But actually what it's about creating an environment where they understand what ethics are and why they matter. So what they end up with is their own value system, their own course. They need to understand that we've got value systems. That doesn't mean their values are going to be the same as ours. We have to recognise that. But actually creating an environment where they understand those kind of things, I think, does become really quite important. And I think that has to start really, really early. And I suppose in a way, we probably do that. We may not just realise that's what we're teaching, I think this idea of perhaps giving complete freedom maybe can be a bit misplaced. Actually, it's freedom within the constraints of ethical consequence, maybe. I don't know. I don't have youngsters anymore, and I'm relieved. My daughter's just turned 30. But at some point, hopefully, she'll have children, and then we'll have to start this fear in that point. But she's just a millennial. So she wasn't truly digital native. But Gen Zs are the first generation who are true digital natives. They're wired differently. They think differently. Everything about their perception of the role that digital plays is very, very different.
One of the things that brought PJ and I together to want to do something together, and it's taken a while, was about being dads, was about the concerns for our kids, wasn't it? About, are they going to be equipped? Are we doing the right thing to kind of get them through school, let alone getting them into careers? And I have a concern that school isn't fit for purpose for a lot of this stuff. They're going to, going to be challenges in the workplace, because there's real different views generationally these days about work alone. What you do in work and kind of what you don't. And I think you're absolutely right about needing to have that guiding path, because kids these days are so tech savvy. They'll find guidance from something called someone else online, or an avatar, or something like that. So, just got to be really careful about what goes on in those bedrooms and what they're looking at. That's always my biggest concern.
This might be a bit of an oversimplification, but you can only draw on your own experiences, can't you? So my parents divorced when I was really small. So in the early 1970s. So what that did was that made it really quite unusual. I was literally the only 6-year-old in my class whose parents were separated. By the time I finished school, clearly I don't think anybody's parents were together. But back in 1972, it was really, and I wasn't allowed to tell anybody because there was a bit of shame. It's not because we were embarrassed about it. It's just my mum didn't want us to be teased. So my mum was a really young mum as well. So she was raising 2 kids. I've got a younger brother, and she adopted quite a straightforward approach. First of all, it was different. Parenting was different. She ruled us with a rod of iron. But what she had, looking back on it, was she had a really strong core. And as I grew into a teenager and kind of all the things that went with that, she just used to say, she used to give me little sound bites, and they cemented kind of anchor points for me. Several of her sound bites would be, remember, because we were obviously, the equivalent of universal credit kids, that kind of stuff, free school meals, free school shoes, that kind of stuff. And she would say, nobody's better than you. Remember that. You're no better than anybody else, but nobody is better than you. It made me quite a bolshy 17-year-old, I have to say. But actually what she anchored in me was a really strong sense of self-belief. She also said, which was linked to that, nobody will do it for you. If you want something, you're going to have to do it yourself, because there is literally nobody you can rely on other than yourself. So that's fine. So that anchored in. But the other thing that she used to say was, I don't mind what you do, but don't you ever bring shame to my door.
Oh, wow.
So I just behaved myself. I had no idea what shame meant, because it wasn't defined. But basically what she was setting out was a whole raft of rules. And it was quite simplistic parenting, but it was incredibly effective. Oh, and the other thing that she did was she was a smoker. I mean, ultimately, it was responsible for her premature death. But she said to me, you can smoke if you want, but you've got to pay for them. And I was too scared. Literally, I'm not kidding. I was scared that I would like them. And I had no money, so I couldn't buy them. And I am almost 60 years old, and I have never even had a puff of a cigarette. That's how effective that particular she was. So what she worked out within the sort of the environment that she operated in was she worked out how to create a value structure with me. Yeah. And it was really simple.
Yeah. Maybe we forget that sometimes.
Suggesting that it would work that way today, but it's just kind of finding that vibe. And why did all of that work? Because she was the beginning, the middle, and the end for me. It was that simple. My biggest life fear would have been to disappoint her. So therefore it worked, didn't it? She was really clever. She was really clever.
I'm with you on that, mate.
She knew I adored her, so she knew I wouldn't let her down. So she just played me.
What a legend. What a legend. You sounded amazing. And how does that lesson now, that very straightforward approach that's very similar to my mum's and dad's, Irish Catholic, don't bring trouble to my door, all that sort of stuff, and you don't. You take it to other ones. So now you're NED of these, big businesses and government initiatives, whatever. Some that might still be male, heavily led. How does that advice, how are you re-articulating that advice to people like my daughter that's going to be coming through, and your daughter, to give them that resilience, I suppose, or that knowledge or that framework that your mum gave you to stand up for themselves if they do see any sexism or misogyny? Is there any sort of advice that you can give me as a parent or as a business owner? Or
I think the one thing that runs through is using your voice. And that's everybody, and you can do that in a variety of different ways. I'm not advocating, it being necessarily an aggressive response. It's about an appropriate response in that particular circumstance, but it is about using your voice, about speaking up and about saying, whatever, that's not acceptable. Or I have done this several times where I've been involved with organisations and I've said at the beginning of, our interaction, where's the women? Where are the women? Haven't got any women? Kind of thing. And and it makes people uncomfortable and all of that good stuff. But I'm okay with uncomfortable. Making people uncomfortable has never bothered me, truthfully, because that's actually not really my problem. If I'm calling out something that I see as a behaviour problem and it makes you uncomfortable, probably need to reflect on your behaviour a bit then, don't you?
Right. What about those women that are still scared of those men that are going to hurt them? How do they find that voice, would you say? There might not be an answer.
That's more complex. I'm not sure we have to find our voice. I think we have to educate and train men not to hurt women. That's it. Yeah. Ultimately, it's not about me. It's not about women dressing differently. It's not about women changing their behaviour. It's about men changing their behaviour. That's ultimately the truth, isn't it?
And that's the lesson that needs to be on the curriculum. Because not everyone has got a mum like you and that framework, those values that I think are certainly installed and instilled in a lot of people I know.
Yeah,
probably those values that people are getting nowadays. I don't know.
Yeah, my mum's advice would be knee him in the balls and punch him. but that's possibly not the most constructive piece.
Maybe that's sort of what's the word? Theoretically, knee them in the ball. You know,
there's a reality position in that, isn't there? But I think the point is it's about recognising societally that is something we've still got to change. I think what's the statistic, isn't it? A woman is killed by somebody that she is with every other day. I mean, the number is horrific still, isn't it? So we are still in a situation where violence against women and girls is a societal problem. I mean, we've moved past, thankfully. Yeah. It's a domestic and all that kind of baggage that went with it. But we are in a position still where it's still a problem and it's still a concern that we've got to deal with, and it's a societal problem, and the only way you stop that is you have to stop men from doing it, because ultimately that's what it is, isn't it?
You got any closing comments, Andy?
No, loved it. And I think a good takeaway for me is just this simple little things, little nudges that will make a difference. Sometimes it's so tempting to be overcomplicated and trying to find a solution. I've got a little framed sign I've got at home, which I put my boys in front of every now and then if they've spoken inappropriately, not acted in the way. And it's got some very simple words on it, which is "don't be a dick." And it's just a good little grounding of, reminding them of who we are, whatever the scenario. And so I think, simple ways of doing things are where you start from for me.
Let me give you a closing point on that, Andy, because I think that's really, really good. So the example I would use is my husband, right? So he has been married to me for almost 40 years. So the journey that I've been on in terms of my career, he's walked with me, right? And we've often talked about this. What's it like? And, what's it like to be married to me? It's quite hard, actually. It's quite difficult. If I go back to the 1990s, and let me tell you an anecdote, because you will not get your breath to this. So before we had kids, so I'm going back a long time, he was in the round table, right? And I was in the equivalent of. And he got a company car. He got a BMW, right, in the job that he was in. And I'd got a company car. I had a Mercedes. And some of the people in the round table asked him how it was his company had given him 2 company cars, one for me and one for him.
Wow.
Because it was incomprehensible that a woman could be successful in her own right. Now, he wasn't in that environment. And to be fair, he was kind of, I suppose, having to put up with that crap, if you think about it. And he, even as a younger chap, he always found it brilliant that I succeeded. So I guess what I'm saying is the real thing is where you've got sons is teach them not to be frightened of strong women. Teach them to celebrate strong women. That's the point, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And teach your daughters that it's okay to be strong.
Wow. Well, there's the hard end that anyone needs. I mean, we've got teach men not to be scared of strong women. Don't be a dick. Use your voice. Toxic tech. Ethics gap. Don't blame. Don't bring that trouble to my house. You can smoke if you want to, but you've got to pay for them. I mean, there's been loads of topics covered, Tracy. And as episode 1 goes, I suspect that was pretty good. I mean, I feel like absolutely buzzed now, to be fair. I want to take all this advice into the world. How can we top Tracy Westall? Do you have any ideas or any recommendations of people that we should be speaking to, Tracy?
Oh, I think there's lots of people that could do much, much better than me, for sure. I think there's a couple that sprang to mind for different reasons. I thought I mentioned Rebecca already. Yeah. And the reason is that she has such a big story, and she's used to take such, without sort of divulging her story, it's her story, but she's taken something that is just so dramatically awful and turned it into as much of a positive as possible. And I am in complete awe of her. I think she's wonderful. And the other one as well, and I've introduced Andy previously, is a lady called Jacqueline DeRocca, who is currently the chair of Bletchley Park Trust. So she would be able to give you a really interesting perspective about tech, code breakers, the role that women played in the war. And I think that she would be she's done a million other things as well, as Andy knows. But at the moment, that's one of the things that she's involved in, which I just think is an amazing thing to be doing. So there's a couple there for you.
Fantastic.
Rebecca, Jacqueline, if you're listening, I'm going to come into your DM soon. Thank you, Tracy. Honestly, Andy, how are you feeling, man? I'm feeling absolutely buzzed about that.
Yeah, fantastic. I can't wait for you boys to get home.
You've got the answers, but if we don't talk about the problems, we never come up with the answers, do we?
Absolutely.
I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? Starting those conversations, peer-to-peer stuff that, not everyone will have a 30, 40 minute with Tracy Westall OBE, and now they will through this podcast. So Tracy, it's been honestly a real blessing. Thank you for joining us on episode 1, and we'll let you bugger off and get your train.
Thank you very much.